Sarah adjusted her rearview mirror, her eyes flicking between the road and the map on the passenger seat. The old country lane twisted and turned, flanked by towering trees whose branches intertwined overhead, casting long, skeletal shadows. It was late afternoon, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow on the horizon. Windfall, a quaint and remote town, was just a few miles away, and Sarah's excitement mixed with a twinge of nervousness. She had always dreamed of teaching in a place with history, where the walls themselves seemed to whisper tales of the past. Hawthorne Schoolhouse was just that, a storied institution, rich with over a century of memories. When she had received the job offer, it had felt like a dream come true. She was eager to start fresh, leaving behind the chaos of city life for the tranquility of the countryside. As she approached the town, the first thing she noticed was the stillness. Windfall seemed frozen in time, its streets lined with Victorian-era houses and old-fashioned lampposts. She passed a general store, a diner, and a few other quaint establishments before the schoolhouse came into view. Hawthorne Schoolhouse stood at the end of a long driveway, its brick facade weathered by time. Ivy crept up one side, and the windows, though clean, had a slightly cloudy appearance, as if they had seen more than they cared to share. Sarah parked her car and stepped out, taking a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. She felt a shiver, but she attributed it to the cool breeze and her own anticipation. The interior of the schoolhouse was just as charming as she had imagined. High ceilings, wooden floors that creaked with every step, and rows of desks that had likely seated generations of children. The walls were adorned with old photographs and paintings of past headmasters and students. As she walked through the hallway, she felt a sense of déjà vu, as if she had been here before in a dream. Sarah found her classroom at the end of the hall. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow on the wooden desks. She set down her bag and started unpacking, placing books on shelves and arranging supplies. She was so engrossed in her work that she didn't notice the figure standing silently at the door. "Hello there," came a soft voice, startling Sarah. She turned to see an elderly woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. "You must be Miss Carter, our new teacher. I'm Mrs. Whitaker, the school's custodian." Sarah smiled, feeling a wave of relief at the friendly face. "Yes, that's me. It's so nice to meet you, Mrs. Whitaker. This place is amazing." "It certainly has its charm," Mrs. Whitaker replied, though her smile wavered slightly. "But it also has its history. I imagine you've heard about the fire?" Sarah nodded, recalling the brief mention in her job offer letter. "Yes, I read that there was a fire many years ago. It's so tragic." Mrs. Whitaker's expression grew somber. "It was. Many young lives were lost that night. Some say their spirits still linger here, unable to move on." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you believe in ghosts, Mrs. Whitaker?" The older woman shrugged. "I believe in the past, and I believe in the power of memories. Sometimes they're strong enough to leave an imprint. Just be mindful of the history here, Miss Carter. Respect it, and you'll be just fine." With that, Mrs. Whitaker gave a reassuring pat on Sarah's shoulder and left her to her work. Sarah looked around the room, her earlier excitement now tinged with a sense of foreboding. She shook it off and continued setting up her classroom, determined to make it a place of learning and joy for her students. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the windows, Sarah finished her preparations and decided to call it a day. She locked up the schoolhouse and walked to her car, glancing back at the imposing structure one last time. The window seemed to stare back at her, dark and watchful. Driving away, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being observed. She told herself it was just her imagination, a natural response to the eerie stories Mrs. Whitaker had shared. But deep down, a part of her wondered what secrets the old schoolhouse was hiding, and whether she was truly alone within its walls. Sarah awoke the next morning to the sound of birds chirping outside her window. The sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow over her small, cozy apartment. It was her first official day at Hawthorne Schoolhouse, and despite the lingering unease from the previous night, she felt a renewed sense of determination. Arriving at the schoolhouse early, Sarah was eager to familiarize herself with the building before her students arrived. She wandered through the hallways, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. As she explored, she noticed a door she hadn't seen before, slightly ajar at the end of a narrow corridor. Curiosity piqued, Sarah pushed the door open and found herself in a small, dimly lit room filled with old filing cabinets and dusty boxes. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and must. She pulled open one of the drawers and began sifting through the contents. Old attendance records, faded photographs, and yellowed newspaper clippings. One article in particular caught her eye. The headline read, "Tragic fire at Hawthorne Schoolhouse claims lives of 10 students." Sarah's heart sank as she read the details of the devastating event that had occurred over 50 years ago. The article described how a fire had broken out in the middle of the night, trapping the children inside. The cause of the fire was never determined, and the town had been left to mourn the loss of so many young lives. As she placed the clipping back in the drawer, Sarah felt a sudden chill. The room seemed to grow colder, and she heard faint whispers, like the hushed conversations of children. She turned around, but the room was empty. She shook her head, trying to dispel the eerie feeling. "It's just your imagination," she told herself firmly. Later that day, as Sarah was teaching her first class, a sense of unease returned. The students were attentive and well-behaved, but every now and then she would catch one of them staring at something just over her shoulder, their expressions puzzled or frightened. When she turned to look, there was nothing there. During recess, Sarah sat at her desk, flipping through the pages of an old yearbook she had found in the storage room. The black and white photographs showed smiling faces of children and teachers, a stark contrast to the haunting silence of the present. She traced her fingers over the names, wondering what had become of them. As she continued to read, a particular photo made her pause. It was a class picture taken the year of the fire. The children's faces were solemn, their eyes seeming to bore into her soul. She felt a strange connection to them, a sense of sorrow and unfinished business. She closed the yearbook, her heart heavy. That night, as she was locking up, Sarah felt the chill again. The schoolhouse, so full of life during the day, felt oppressively silent and watchful after dark. She hurried to her car, eager to leave the eerie atmosphere behind. As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror and thought she saw a figure standing at one of the windows, a pale face watching her departure. Over the next few days, strange occurrences continued. Sarah heard whispers and giggles when she was alone, saw fleeting shadows out of the corner of her eye, and felt a constant sense of being watched. She tried to ignore it, focusing on her teaching and the well-being of her students, but the feeling was always there, lurking in the back of her mind. One afternoon, determined to find answers, Sarah decided to return to the storage room. She rummaged through the boxes and filing cabinets, looking for anything that might shed light on the mystery of the fire. As she worked, the whispers grew louder, and she felt a cold draft sweep through the room. She found an old journal, its pages brittle with age. The entries were written by a former teacher, Miss Emily Lawson, who had been at the school during the time of the fire. As Sarah read, her blood ran cold. The journal detailed strange occurrences leading up to the fire, unexplained noises, objects moving on their own, and a pervasive sense of dread. Miss Lawson had believed the schoolhouse was haunted, and her final entry hinted at a dark secret she had uncovered, one she feared had led to the tragic event. Sarah closed the journal, her hands trembling. She knew she had to uncover the truth, not just for her own peace of mind, but for the restless spirits of the children who had perished. The schoolhouse was more than just a place of learning. It was a place of secrets, and it was time to bring them to light. The morning sun did little to dispel the chill that had settled over Sarah. As she walked into the schoolhouse, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The walls, once welcoming, now seemed to loom over her with a silent, oppressive weight. She forced herself to focus on her lesson plans, trying to push aside the memories of the strange occurrences and unsettling whispers. The school day began as usual, with the children filing in and taking their seats. Sarah smiled warmly at them, determined to create a positive and engaging environment. She started the lesson, her voice steady, but the unease lingered in the back of her mind. During a reading exercise, Sarah noticed one of her students, a quiet girl named Lily, staring intently at something behind her. Sarah turned but saw nothing out of the ordinary. When she looked back at Lily, the girl's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Is everything all right, Lily?" Sarah asked gently. Lily hesitated before nodding. "Yes, Miss Carter. I just thought I saw... Never mind." Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she forced a reassuring smile. "If you ever see anything that bothers you, please let me know." Lily nodded, but the look of fear didn't leave her eyes. As the day went on, more students seemed distracted, their gazes flicking to the corners of the room or just behind Sarah. She felt a constant prickling at the back of her neck, as if unseen eyes were watching her every move. During lunch, she overheard snippets of conversation between the children, whispering about the ghost and the girl in white. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Sarah decided to stay late after school. She needed to understand what was happening, to find some logical explanation for the strange events. As the last student left for the day, she took a deep breath and began her investigation. She started in her classroom, examining every nook and cranny. She found nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual school supplies and decorations. Moving into the hallway, she felt the familiar chill. The whispers started again, faint and indistinct, like distant echoes of a forgotten time. Sarah made her way to the storage room, her heart pounding. She opened the door and the cold air enveloped her. She felt a presence, something unseen, but undeniably there. She steeled herself and began rifling through the old documents and artifacts again. As she sifted through a box of old photographs, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, scattering the pictures across the floor. Sarah knelt to gather them, her hands trembling. She paused when she saw a photograph of a young girl in a white dress, her eyes sad and haunting. The name Eliza was written on the back. "Who are you, Eliza?" Sarah whispered, a sense of urgency gripping her. She placed the photograph in her pocket and continued searching. She found an old class register with Eliza's name listed among the students who had perished in the fire. Her finger traced over the names, each one a reminder of the tragedy that had taken place. Suddenly, a cold hand brushed against her cheek. Sarah gasped and spun around. The room was empty. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had to find out what Eliza wanted, why she was still here. That night, as Sarah sat in her apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about the girl in the photograph. She felt a connection to Eliza, a sense of responsibility to uncover her story. She knew she couldn't do it alone, so she decided to reach out to someone who might be able to help. The next day, Sarah approached Mrs. Whitaker. The older woman's eyes widened slightly as Sarah showed her the photograph. "Mrs. Whitaker, do you know anything about this girl? Her name is Eliza. She was one of the students who died in the fire." Mrs. Whitaker's face grew somber. "Eliza? Yes, I remember her. She was a sweet, quiet girl. Her family was devastated by her loss. Some say she never left the schoolhouse, that her spirit lingers, unable to find peace." Sarah nodded, feeling a mix of fear and determination. "I think she's trying to tell me something. I need to understand what happened to help her move on." Mrs. Whitaker sighed. "Be careful, Miss Carter. The past is a dangerous thing to dig up. But if you're determined, there's a local historian, Mr. Granger, who might be able to help you. He's been studying the town's history for years." Sarah thanked her and made a note to visit Mr. Granger. As she continued her day, the feeling of being watched never left her. The schoolhouse was filled with unseen eyes, and Sarah knew that uncovering the truth was the only way to set things right. That evening, as she left the schoolhouse, Sarah glanced back at the dark windows. She thought she saw a figure standing there, watching her with sad, longing eyes. She knew then that she couldn't rest until she had uncovered the secrets of Hawthorne Schoolhouse and helped Eliza and the other lost children find peace. Sarah's resolve to uncover the truth about Eliza and the tragic fire grew stronger by the day. The following evening, armed with a flashlight and a notebook, she returned to the schoolhouse after hours. The building loomed large and silent under the pale moonlight, casting long, eerie shadows across the grounds. She felt a chill run down her spine as she approached, but she pushed her fear aside and unlocked the door. The schoolhouse was dark and silent, the only sound the soft creaking of the old wooden floors beneath her feet. Sarah made her way to her classroom, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the darkness. She set her notebook on the desk and began to jot down her thoughts and observations. "Eliza," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the stillness. "If you're here, please show yourself. I want to help you." For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper filled the air, followed by the sound of a child's laughter. Sarah's heart raced, but she stood her ground, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of the ghostly presence. "Eliza!" she called again, her voice trembling. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, and Sarah could see her breath forming in the air. She felt a cold breeze brush past her, and the pages of her notebook fluttered as if touched by an invisible hand. The flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment she thought she saw a shadowy figure standing at the back of the classroom. Gathering her courage, Sarah took a step toward the figure. "Eliza, I want to help you. Please, tell me what happened." The figure remained still, its form barely visible in the dim light. Sarah took another step forward and the flashlight flickered again. The figure vanished, leaving her alone in the darkened room. She felt a pang of disappointment but refused to give up. Determined to continue her search, Sarah decided to explore the rest of the schoolhouse. She moved through the hallways, her flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. As she approached the storage room, the whispers grew louder, and she felt a sense of urgency. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was colder than before, the air thick with an oppressive sense of dread. Sarah shivered as she made her way to the back, where she had found the old photographs and documents. She knelt down and began to sift through the boxes, hoping to find something she had missed. As she searched, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, slamming the door shut behind her. Sarah gasped and dropped the flashlight, plunging the room into darkness. She fumbled for the flashlight, her hands trembling, and when she finally managed to turn it on, she saw a small, ghostly figure standing just a few feet away. The figure was a young girl, her eyes wide with fear and sadness. She wore a white dress, now tattered and singed at the edges. Her hair was long and dark, framing her pale face. Sarah's heart ached for the child, and she took a cautious step forward. "Eliza," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The ghostly girl nodded, her eyes pleading. "Help us," she said, her voice echoing in the stillness. "We're trapped." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What happened, Eliza? How can I help you?" Eliza's eyes filled with tears, and she pointed to a spot on the floor. Sarah followed her gaze and saw a trapdoor, partially hidden beneath a dusty rug. She moved quickly, pulling the rug aside and prying open the trapdoor. A narrow staircase descended into darkness, and Sarah felt a wave of unease. Taking a deep breath, she shone the flashlight down the stairs and began her descent. The air grew colder as she moved deeper into the bowels of the schoolhouse, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. She reached the bottom of the stairs and found herself in a small, cramped cellar. The walls were lined with old, charred wooden beams, and the air was thick with the scent of smoke and decay. Sarah's flashlight flickered again, and she saw the ghostly figures of children huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. They looked at her with a mixture of hope and desperation. "Please," Eliza's voice echoed through the cellar. "Help us find peace." Sarah's heart broke for the children, and she nodded. "I will," she promised. "I'll find out what happened and make sure you're all remembered." As she spoke, the ghostly figures began to fade, their forms dissolving into the darkness. The temperature in the cellar rose slightly, and the oppressive feeling began to lift. Sarah knew she had taken the first step toward uncovering the truth, but she also knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty. Determined to see it through, she climbed back up the stairs and exited the storage room, her mind racing with possibilities. She had made contact with the spirits of the children, and now it was up to her to piece together the events that had led to the tragic fire. As she locked up the schoolhouse and headed home, she couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were still watching her, guiding her toward the answers she sought. The following day, Sarah arrived at the schoolhouse with a new sense of purpose. She knew that the key to helping Eliza and the other spirits lay in uncovering the truth about the fire. After her classes, she decided to investigate the playground, a place that had always felt particularly eerie. The playground was situated behind the schoolhouse, bordered by a thick line of trees that seemed to close in on the area. The equipment, though well-maintained, had an old-fashioned charm, with a rusting merry-go-round swings that creaked in the wind, and a seesaw that had long since lost its luster. As Sarah walked through the playground, she felt the weight of the past pressing down on her. She made her way to the swings where she noticed something odd. One of the swings was moving gently, as if someone had just jumped off it. The air around her grew colder, and she could hear faint giggles like children playing a game of hide and seek. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine but pressed on, determined to uncover whatever secrets the playground held. Near the edge of the playground, half hidden by overgrown bushes, Sarah found a small, charred diary. The cover was blackened and the pages were brittle, but the writing inside was still legible. She carefully opened it and began to read. The diary belonged to a girl named Margaret, one of the students who had died in the fire. Margaret's entries were filled with the innocent musings of a child, but as Sarah read on, she discovered darker passages detailing strange occurrences and a growing fear among the children. One entry in particular stood out: October 21st, 1968. "Something is wrong. I hear whispers at night, and the other children are scared. We tried to tell Miss Lawson, but she doesn't believe us. Last night, Eliza said she saw a man with burning eyes watching us from the woods. I'm scared to go to sleep. What if he comes for us?" Sarah's heart pounded as she read the entry. Who was the man with burning eyes? And what did he want with the children? She knew she had to find out more about him. She carefully tucked the diary into her bag and continued her search. As she walked deeper into the playground, she felt a presence behind her. Turning slowly, she saw the ghostly figure of Eliza standing by the swings, her expression sad and forlorn. Sarah took a step toward her, but Eliza shook her head and pointed to the far corner of the playground, where an old, dilapidated shed stood. Sarah approached the shed cautiously. The door hung loosely on its hinges, and the wood was rotting away. Pushing the door open, she stepped inside and found herself in a small, dusty room filled with old sports equipment and broken furniture. In the corner, covered in cobwebs, was a large wooden chest. She knelt down and opened the chest, coughing as a cloud of dust rose into the air. Inside, she found a collection of old toys, books, and a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. She picked up the letters and carefully untied the ribbon, revealing a series of correspondences between Miss Emily Lawson and the school's headmaster at the time, Mr. Gregory Harlow. The letters revealed a growing concern from Miss Lawson about the safety of the children. She wrote about strange occurrences, the children's fears, and her suspicions of a man lurking around the school grounds. Mr. Harlow's responses, however, were dismissive, urging her to focus on her duties and not to spread unfounded rumors. One letter, dated just a week before the fire, stood out. October 14th, 1968. Mr. Harlow, I must insist that we take the children's fears seriously. They speak of a man with burning eyes watching them, and I have seen strange figures near the woods myself. The children are terrified, and I fear for their safety. Please, we must investigate this matter further. Yours sincerely, Emily Lawson. Sarah felt a chill as she read the letter. Miss Lawson had tried to protect the children, but her warnings had gone unheeded. She knew she had to find out more about Mr. Harlow and his connection to the fire. Perhaps the local historian, Mr. Granger, would have more information. As she stood up, she felt a cold breeze brush past her, and the whispers grew louder. She turned to see Eliza standing in the doorway, her eyes filled with sadness and a plea for help. Sarah nodded, her resolve strengthened. She would uncover the truth and help Eliza and the other children find peace. Leaving the shed, Sarah felt the weight of unseen eyes watching her every step. She knew she was getting closer to the truth, and that the spirits of the children were guiding her. With a newfound determination, she made her way back to the schoolhouse, ready to continue her investigation and bring light to the dark history of Hawthorne Schoolhouse. The next morning, Sarah felt the weight of her discoveries heavy on her shoulders. She couldn't stop thinking about Eliza and the other children, their pleas for help echoing in her mind. Determined to find more answers, she decided to visit the local historian, Mr. Granger, who Mrs. Whitaker had mentioned. Mr. Granger's house was a quaint, ivy-covered cottage on the outskirts of Windfall. The smell of old books and wood polish greeted Sarah as she stepped inside. Mr. Granger, a wiry man with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes, welcomed her warmly and led her to his study. "Miss Carter, I've heard quite a bit about you," Mr. Granger said, settling into an armchair. "You're looking into the old schoolhouse's history, I gather." "Yes," Sarah replied, handing him the letters and Margaret's diary. "I found these while investigating the schoolhouse. They suggest something more sinister was at play during the fire." Mr. Granger adjusted his glasses and examined the documents. His expression grew grim as he read. "This is troubling indeed. I remember the fire well. I was just a boy, but the tragedy left a deep scar on the community. Do you know anything about the man with burning eyes? Sarah asked. Mr. Granger nodded slowly. There were rumors, of course. Some said it was a vengeful spirit. Others spoke of a deranged arsonist. But nothing was ever proven. The official story was an accident caused by faulty wiring. But I've always suspected there was more to it. Sarah leaned forward, her heart pounding. Do you think it was Mr. Harlow? Mr. Granger frowned. Gregory Harlow was a strict man, but I never thought him capable of such evil. However, his dismissive attitude towards Miss Lawson's concerns is telling. He might have known more than he let on. Sarah felt a surge of frustration. But why would he cover it up? Why let those children die? Mr. Granger sighed. Fear, perhaps. Or maybe he was protecting someone. We may never know for sure, but your findings suggest there's more to uncover. Sarah thanked Mr. Granger and left his cottage, her mind racing with new questions. She returned to the schoolhouse, determined to delve deeper into the mystery. As she walked through the empty hallways, the whispers began again, more urgent this time. Help us. Sarah followed the voices, her heart pounding. They led her to the old library, a dusty room filled with ancient books and forgotten knowledge. She felt a cold breeze as she stepped inside, the temperature dropping sharply. Eliza! She called out, her voice echoing in the stillness. A soft cry answered her, and Sarah saw the ghostly figure of Eliza standing by the window. The little girl pointed to a bookshelf, her eyes filled with sorrow. Sarah approached the shelf and noticed a loose panel. She pried it open, revealing a hidden compartment filled with old documents. Among the papers, she found a journal belonging to Mr. Harlow. She read through the entries, her hands trembling. The journal revealed Mr. Harlow's growing paranoia and fear, his belief that the schoolhouse was cursed. He wrote about strange occurrences, the children's stories of the man with burning eyes, and his own terrifying encounters. One entry, dated the night of the fire, caught Sarah's attention. October 20th, 1968. I can no longer deny the truth. The schoolhouse is haunted by a malevolent spirit. The children are in danger, but I am powerless to stop it. I fear for my own sanity. If something happens, know that I tried my best to protect them. May God forgive me. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Mr. Harlow had known about the danger, but had been too frightened to act. She understood now that the fire had been more than just a tragic accident. It had been the result of a malevolent force. Determined to help the spirits find peace, Sarah decided to perform a seance. She needed to communicate directly with the ghosts, to understand what they wanted and how she could help them move on. She gathered candles, a notebook, and a photograph of Eliza from the storage room. That night, as darkness enveloped the schoolhouse, Sarah set up the seance in her classroom. She arranged the candles in a circle and placed Eliza's photograph in the center. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. Spirits of Hawthorne Schoolhouse, I am here to help you. Please, show me what I need to do. The temperature dropped sharply, and the candles flickered. Shadows danced on the walls, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Sarah felt a presence beside her, and she looked up to see Eliza standing there, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. Help us. Find peace. Sarah's heart ached for the girl. I will, Eliza. I promise. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness. The candles went out, and the air grew thick with a malevolent energy. Sarah felt a cold hand grasp her shoulder, and she gasped, turning to see a figure with burning eyes staring at her, its face twisted in a mask of rage and hatred. Leave this place, the figure hissed, its voice like the crackling of flames. "You cannot save them!" Sarah steeled herself, refusing to be intimidated. "I will not leave until I have helped these children find peace. You cannot scare me away." The figure snarled, its eyes blazing. "You will regret this." With a final furious scream, the figure vanished and the candles flickered back to life. Sarah sat trembling, but her resolve was stronger than ever. She knew now that the spirits were counting on her, and she wouldn't rest until she had uncovered the full truth and set them free. As the night wore on, Sarah stayed in the schoolhouse, piecing together the clues she had found. She felt the unseen eyes watching her, but now they felt more like guardians than threats. The spirits were guiding her, helping her to uncover the dark history that had bound them to this place. With renewed determination, Sarah vowed to uncover the truth about the fire, confront the malevolent spirit, and finally bring peace to Eliza and the other lost souls of Hawthorne Schoolhouse. The next day, Sarah decided to visit the local archives. She needed more information about Mr. Harlow and any potential suspects who could have been involved in the fire. The Windfall Historical Society was housed in an old brick building near the center of town. Its dimly lit interior and musty smell added to the air of mystery. Mrs. Whitaker had agreed to join her, sensing that Sarah could use the moral support. Together, they pored over old newspapers, public records, and historical documents. Hours passed, and just as Sarah began to feel the weight of frustration, she stumbled upon a lead. A series of articles detailing a string of mysterious events leading up to the fire. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to a headline. "Local man arrested for trespassing near schoolhouse." The article described a vagrant named Jonathan Krieger, who had been seen lurking around the school in the weeks before the fire. He had a criminal record and was known for his erratic behavior. Mrs. Whitaker leaned in, reading the article with interest. Krieger was always an odd one. He claimed to see spirits and was obsessed with the supernatural. I remember people saying he was crazy, but maybe there was more to his story. Sarah nodded. He was released just days before the fire. What if he saw something or knew something that got him into trouble? They continued their search and found another article mentioning Krieger's disappearance after the fire. He had vanished without a trace, fueling rumors and speculation. Some believed he had fled, while others thought he had met a more sinister end. Feeling a mix of excitement and dread, Sarah knew she had to find out more about Krieger. She decided to visit the old asylum where Krieger had been committed before his arrest. The asylum, now abandoned, stood on the outskirts of town, its crumbling walls and overgrown grounds a testament to its dark history. Mrs. Whitaker hesitated at the entrance. "Are you sure about this, Sarah? That place gives me the creeps." Sarah nodded, her determination unwavering. "We have to follow every lead. If Krieger knew something about the fire, we need to find out." The asylum's interior was a maze of decaying rooms and eerie silence. Sarah and Mrs. Whitaker made their way to the records room, where they found old patient files covered in dust and cobwebs. After some searching, they located Jonathan Krieger's file. Krieger's file was filled with notes from doctors and staff, detailing his claims of seeing spirits and hearing voices. One entry in particular stood out. October 15th, 1968. Patient claims to see a man with burning eyes stalking the children at Hawthorne Schoolhouse. He insists that the man is a malevolent spirit intent on harming the children. Patient's condition deteriorates as he becomes more agitated and paranoid. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Krieger had seen the same man with burning eyes that the children had described. She turned to Mrs. Whitaker, her voice trembling. Krieger was telling the truth. He saw the spirit, and he tried to warn everyone. Mrs. Whitaker nodded, her face pale. But no one believed him. They thought he was mad. Sarah carefully placed the file back and continued searching. She found another entry, dated the day before the fire. October 20th, 1968. Patient became hysterical, claiming the spirit would set the schoolhouse ablaze. He begged to be released so he could warn the town. Request denied. Patient sedated for his own safety. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. Krieger had known about the fire and had tried to stop it, but his warnings had gone unheeded. She felt a surge of anger and sorrow for the man who had been dismissed as insane. Mrs. Whitaker, we need to find out where Krieger went after the fire. Maybe he left more clues. They returned to the Historical Society and searched for any records of Krieger's whereabouts. After hours of digging, they found a death certificate. Jonathan Krieger had been found dead in the woods behind the schoolhouse just a week after the fire. The cause of death was listed as unknown, but there were rumors of foul play. Sarah's mind raced. What if Krieger was killed because he knew too much? Maybe the spirit or someone connected to it silenced him. Mrs. Whitaker looked grim. It's possible. We need to be very careful, Sarah. This is more dangerous than we thought. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of their discovery. They had uncovered a web of secrets and lies that had been buried for decades. She knew that the spirits of the children, and now Krieger, were counting on her to bring the truth to light. As they left the Historical Society, Sarah felt the familiar chill of unseen eyes watching her. She knew that the malevolent spirit was aware of her investigation and would do anything to stop her. But she also felt the presence of Eliza and the other children, guiding her, urging her to continue. With newfound determination, Sarah and Mrs. Whitaker returned to the schoolhouse. They knew that the next step would be the most dangerous yet. They had to confront the malevolent spirit and uncover the final pieces of the puzzle to bring peace to the restless souls of Hawthorne's schoolhouse. Sarah and Mrs. Whitaker arrived at the schoolhouse as dusk settled over Windfall. The building loomed dark and foreboding against the evening sky, its windows like empty eyes watching their every move. They carried with them the knowledge they had painstakingly uncovered, and Sarah felt a mix of fear and determination. I think we should start in the storage room, Sarah suggested. It's where I first made contact with Eliza, and it feels like a focal point for the spirits. Mrs. Whitaker nodded in agreement. I'll help you set up. Just be careful, Sarah. We don't know what we're dealing with. The storage room was cold and dimly lit by the small lanterns they had brought. Sarah arranged candles in a circle and placed a few personal items she had found in the shed. Margaret's diary, the letters from Miss Lawson, and a photograph of Jonathan Krieger. These relics of the past seemed to hold the key to unlocking the mystery. As Sarah lit the candles, the room grew even colder, and the familiar whispers began to fill the air. She could feel the presence of the spirits, their eyes on her, waiting. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Spirits of Hawthorne Schoolhouse, I am here to help you. Eliza, Margaret, Jonathan, and all the others who lost their lives in the fire, please show yourselves. Tell me what I need to do to help you find peace. The temperature dropped sharply, and the flames of the candles flickered. Shadows danced on the walls, and Sarah felt a presence behind her. She turned to see Eliza standing there, her ghostly form shimmering in the candlelight. Her eyes were filled with a mix of hope and sorrow. Eliza, Sarah whispered. I'm here to help you. Please tell me what happened. Eliza's lips moved, but no sound came out. Instead, the room seemed to shift, and Sarah found herself in a vision of the past. She was standing in the schoolhouse, but it was different, brighter, filled with the sounds of children laughing and playing. The air smelled of fresh chalk and wood polish. She saw Eliza and the other children, their faces bright with innocence and joy. But then, the atmosphere changed. The children grew quiet, their expressions turning to fear as a shadowy figure appeared at the edge of the playground. The man with burning eyes. Sarah could feel his malevolent presence, his gaze like fire. The vision shifted again, and Sarah was standing in the hallway outside her classroom. Flames licked at the walls and the air was thick with smoke. She heard the children screaming, saw them pounding on the windows, trapped by the inferno. Jonathan Krieger's voice echoed in her mind, his warnings unheeded, his fate sealed. The vision faded, and Sarah was back in the storage room, her heart pounding. She understood now. The fire had been no accident. The malevolent spirit had caused it, feeding on the fear and despair of the children. Jonathan Krieger had tried to stop it, but he had been silenced. "Eliza, I promise I'll help you," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "But I need to know how to defeat the spirit. How do I set you free?" Eliza pointed to the photograph of Jonathan Krieger. Sarah picked it up and noticed a faint inscription on the back. "Find the source. Break the curse." It was a clue, but what did it mean? "Mrs. Whitaker, we need to find the source of the spirit's power," Sarah said, turning to the older woman. "Something must be anchoring it here, something we can destroy to break the curse." Mrs. Whitaker nodded, her face pale but determined. "The old records mentioned a hidden cellar beneath the schoolhouse. It's where the children sought refuge during the fire. Maybe that's where we'll find the source." With renewed urgency, Sarah and Mrs. Whitaker made their way to the cellar. They found the trapdoor in the storage room, hidden beneath a layer of dust and cobwebs. Sarah pried it open, and they descended into the darkness. The cellar was damp and cold, the walls lined with old charred beams. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and decay. As they moved deeper into the cellar, the whispers grew louder, more frantic. Sarah felt the malevolent presence closing in, but she pressed on, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. In the far corner of the cellar, they found a small stone altar. Atop it lay a blackened, twisted object that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Sarah felt a wave of revulsion as she approached it, knowing instinctively that this was the source of the spirit's power. "This must be it," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to destroy it." Mrs. Whitaker handed Sarah a hammer, and she took a deep breath, raising it above her head. As she brought it down on the object, a deafening scream filled the cellar, and the air seemed to shudder. The object shattered into pieces, releasing a wave of dark energy that dissipated into the air. The temperature in the cellar rose, and the oppressive feeling began to lift. Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her, and she turned to see Eliza standing nearby, her form growing brighter, more solid. "Thank you," Eliza whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "We can rest now." As Eliza faded from view, the other spirits appeared, their faces filled with peace and relief. One by one, they vanished, leaving the cellar empty and still. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders, knowing that she had finally set them free. Exhausted but triumphant, Sarah and Mrs. Whitaker made their way back to the schoolhouse. The unseen eyes were gone, the oppressive presence lifted. The spirits of Hawthorne Schoolhouse had found peace, and the dark history had been brought to light. Sarah knew that the schoolhouse would never be the same, but it was no longer a place of fear and despair. It was a place of remembrance, a testament to the strength and resilience of the children who had been lost, but were now finally at rest. With the malevolent spirit vanquished and the children's souls freed, the atmosphere around Hawthorne Schoolhouse began to shift. The oppressive feeling that had hung over the building like a dark cloud lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and closure. Sarah knew that her work was not yet finished. She needed to share the truth with the townspeople and ensure that the memories of those lost were honored. The next morning, Sarah stood in front of the schoolhouse. A small crowd gathered before her. Among them were her students, their parents, and various townspeople, all curious about the strange events and rumors that had spread over the past few weeks. Mrs. Whitaker stood by her side, her presence a comforting reminder of the support she had received. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "I know many of you have heard rumors about the hauntings and the tragic fire that claimed the lives of several children decades ago. I'm here to tell you the truth and to honor the memories of those who were lost." She recounted the story of Eliza and the other children, the malevolent spirit, and the brave attempts of Jonathan Krieger to warn the town. As she spoke, she saw the faces in the crowd change from curiosity to sorrow, and finally to understanding. The pain of the past had long been buried, but it was clear that the community was ready to confront it. "We have uncovered the true cause of the fire," Sarah continued. "A malevolent spirit, anchored by a dark curse, caused the tragedy. With the help of Mrs. Whitaker and the spirits of the children themselves, we have broken the curse and set their souls free. Now it's our duty to remember them and ensure that such a tragedy never happens again." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Sarah felt a wave of relief. She had feared that the townspeople would react with disbelief or anger, but instead, they seemed ready to embrace the truth and honor the memories of those who had been lost. The town decided to hold a memorial service for the children. A plaque was commissioned, bearing the names of the students who had died in the fire, along with Jonathan Krieger and Miss Emily Lawson, whose efforts to protect the children had gone unrecognized for too long. The plaque was placed in the schoolhouse's newly restored garden, a place of beauty and peace where the community could come to remember and reflect. During the memorial service, Sarah stood before the plaque, surrounded by the townspeople. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had helped to bring closure to a painful chapter in the town's history. As the names were read aloud, she glanced around, seeing faces filled with tears, but also with a sense of healing. After the service, Sarah and Mrs. Whitaker walked through the schoolhouse one last time. The building, once filled with shadows and whispers, now felt warm and inviting. The classrooms, hallways, and even the storage rooms seemed to have shed their eerie atmosphere, becoming places of learning and growth once more. "You did a wonderful thing, Sarah," Mrs. Whitaker said, her eyes filled with pride. "You brought light to the darkness and helped those children find peace." Sarah smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "I couldn't have done it without your help. Thank you for believing in me." As they exited the schoolhouse, Sarah felt a gentle breeze, and for a moment, she thought she heard the faint sound of children's laughter. She knew that Eliza and the others were finally at rest, free from the torment that had bound them to the schoolhouse for so long. Life in Windfall gradually returned to normal, but the memory of the tragedy and the bravery of those who had fought to uncover the truth remained. The schoolhouse became a symbol of resilience and hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always a chance for redemption and peace. For Sarah, the experience had been life-changing. She continued to teach at Hawthorne Schoolhouse, dedicating herself to creating a safe and nurturing environment for her students. She knew that the past would always be a part of the town's history, but she also knew that the future was bright and filled with promise. And so, as the sun set over Windfall, casting a golden glow over the town and the schoolhouse, Sarah felt a deep sense of contentment. The ghosts of the past had found their final rest, and she had found her purpose. The story of the ghostly schoolhouse had come to an end, but the legacy of those who had lived, loved, and fought for the truth would live on forever.